The man who wrote the episode was wheelchair bound, and he showed up on the set, and we had a chat. It was a big deal for him. I know he'd been working on that character and on that episode for quite a while. Again, I felt that weight of representing something in the proper way. Hi, my name is Daphne Ashbrook, and I played Melora on Star Trek DS9, and this is Trek Untold.
Welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I am your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. This week on the show, we have a guest who is a person who I have legitimately wanted to speak with since this podcast first began. Regular listeners of this show know that I will talk quite often about a list I wrote when I first began working on the concept of Trek Untold. And that illustrious list I referenced quite frequently was a bunch of guests I wanted to speak with who I didn't think I'd maybe be able to get, or I was hoping to get early on. I don't quite know. It was just basically my way of ideating what this show is going to be about. And in the last year or two, I've really been scratching off a lot of those names, but this one in particular, I would easily say this was like one of the top 5, maybe top 3 on that list, meaning this was a person who I immediately thought of when I thought of the concept of Trek Untold. And that person is Daphne Ashbrook. Trek fans will remember Daphne from her role as Melora in the Star Trek DS9 episode with the exact same name. It was called Melora. It is centered on this character. And what made this episode so interesting is that this was a character who was handicapped. And of course, this is Star Trek DS9, so we were approaching it from a very kind of sci-fi perspective. And that sci-fi reason that she was handicapped was because she was unable to walk due to the gravity that the space station had. Whereas on her home planet, the gravity was a lot lighter, they would be floating around and stuff. It was kind of fascinating to look at things, and honestly, pretty groundbreaking for what it was. It's an episode that is still talked about today. I always see it at least once a week in one of the many Facebook groups that I'm in Star Trek. People are still talking about it. They're debating it, they're discussing it, and that can often be about whether or not this episode is still actually not just relevant, but how that experience has changed from when it was filmed in the 90s to where we are today in the 2020s. And often that conversation leads to, does this episode age well? So today we're going to hear straight from the person who performed that role, Daphne Ashbrook, and she's going to let us know her thoughts on playing the part, the kind of research that she did to play this character, and also just how she thinks about this today in our contemporary times. Daphne has done plenty of other things in her career that we're going to spend some time talking about today, but another real big one for you sci-fi folks out there is that she was part of the 8th Doctor in the made-for-TV American Doctor Who movie. And she has got some stories about that one. And again, we're talking now about some real interesting sci-fi stuff here because we've got one of the most memorable DS9 characters who only appeared once in the series, and then we've got a doctor who really essentially only appeared once for a long time. Really, it wasn't until, maybe 2 decades later that the 8th Doctor returned to TV. So yeah, we got some real fascinating stuff to dig into today, and I'm really excited for this one because Daphne is just such a lovely person, incredibly intelligent, so much wonderful insight on what she does, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear from her today. So let's spend some time today with a performer who has crossed the cosmos in many different sci-fi franchises and then some, and let's enjoy learning and hearing some stories from Daphne Ashbrook. But before we start our chat with this week's guest, I want to remind you to please follow Trek Untold on social media, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find this show on all of those platforms simply by searching for Trek Untold. Make sure you subscribe to this show, whether that's on the audio platform of your choosing or on YouTube, where the video version of this show lives. And speaking of, make sure to check out our YouTube channel more frequently for episodes of our new mini show, Tales from Trek Untold, as well as other sci-fi goodies. And of course, don't forget to leave ratings, reviews, comments, and whatever you can do no matter what platform you're on to enjoy this podcast and show others that you're digging it too. If you want to support this show financially, please consider becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/trekuntold. Shout out to Trek Long Island, who is having their second annual convention this summer at Hop Hog, Long Island, New York. from May 31st to June 2nd. Headlined by Melissa Navia from Strange New Worlds, Armin Shimmerman, Chase Masterson, and J.G. Hertzler from DS9, Ethan Phillips from Star Trek Voyager, and Gabrielle Ruiz from Lower Decks. Among many other modern and classic Trek shows, this 3-day event will feature autographs, panels, including some with yours truly, and other ways for you to hang out with the stars and meet your fellow fans. You can learn more about this event or buy tickets for it at treklongisland.com. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file.
Hello, hello.
Hey, hello. And joining us on the other side of the screen right now, we have someone who you've seen in so many different things. But curiously enough, as I was looking through this person's resume, I discovered there are tons of Star Trek connections in this guest's career. Today, we're chatting with Daphne Ashbrook. Daphne, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. How's it going with you?
I am very, very well here. You know, I say this a lot in my show. Not a lot, but I say this to a lot of guests lately as I'm starting to trim down this list here. But when I first started this podcast, I made this like checklist of names of folks I wanted to speak to. And Daphne Ashbrook is in the top 10, I think top 5. I got to pull up that list again, but you're very high up there because your DS9 appearance is a very interesting and unique one. And I'm very excited to dig into that today.
Right. Thank you.
But we got a little ways to go here, and there's a lot of other things I want to talk about here. But Daphne, I don't know if you're aware, like a lot of the roles you've had actually did cross paths with Trek people.
I think I'm aware of that. You're going to have to refresh my memory.
I definitely will. Don't you worry about that. We're going to get to all that stuff here, but before we dig into that, I just want to ask you the first question that I like to ask all my guests on this podcast, Daphne, and that's, what's your earliest memory of Star Trek? Were you a fan of the show growing up at all?
Oh, yeah. When I was a little kid, I found Star Trek, the first one, and fell in love. I loved it. Oh, my God. I couldn't get enough of that. And now I look at it and I'm like, wow, I was so impressed with how cool it was. And, you know, obviously it's dated, but it still holds. You know, there's some great stuff in there. And I did meet Leonard Nimoy somewhere along the line at an audition, and he was wonderful, and I was in awe. So he was my fave. And then of course I'd met Shatner a couple times, and so yeah, I loved that show.
Well, I've got to probe you on that one now. So you auditioned for a role that was for something that Nimoy was directing?
Yeah, it was one of those films, the one with the whales.
Oh, you auditioned for Star Trek 4. Okay.
Okay, yeah. I was at that time I was doing a series in Oakland, and this film came up, and my agent said, "You got to get in on this. Leonard wants to meet you. You got to go into San Francisco and meet him." And I met him at a theater, some theater. I have no idea what theater, but it was a theater, and it was for the character where I was sort of a person who took people around and explained everything, you know, a tour guide kind of person. And so he had me get up on the stage, and he just would shout direction at me, and I would just sort of do it. And it was an interesting kind of challenge because he was like, it wasn't a normal audition. It was it was him alone in the theater and me up on the stage, and he'd go, "Louder, walk over there when you say that." And I would just do it. And I just sort of, it was like fielding balls, you know, in a baseball game or something. And so it was a lot of fun. And he was hardcore, man. He was wonderful, but he was like, you know, straight. And at the end of it, he was very genuinely sweet. And I did go to a callback, met Shatner in LA sometime after that. Didn't get the part, but I did get to meet him and Shatner. So that was cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. So you were actually auditioning for the role that Catherine Hicks ultimately got in that film.
Right.
Yeah.
She's great in that.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's another Star Trek connection even I didn't know when I was doing my homework. So that's very exciting to hear about.
I got a million of them.
I'm sure you do. We're going to try and get to at least 100 of those today.
Okay.
So, I want to ask you now a little about the secret origin story of Daphne Ashbrook. So I'd love to find out where you grew up, who your parents were and what they did, and what little Daphne wanted to be when she grew up.
Well, that's an easy one. My mother and father were both actors. My mother's still living. She's still acting. And my father was an actor and director, and they met in college doing a play called Dark of the Moon, San Diego State, I think it was Dark of the Moon. And that's where they first met. They did that play. They played opposite each other, the two leads in that. It's a very strange play, but it's great. It's got some great information in that about racism. Even there's levels to it, especially for that time. It's really good. So they played in that show together, and then they did it again at the Old Globe in San Diego, which is where I grew up, San Diego. And the Old Globe is still going strong. My mother still goes to the shows there and has worked there. And anyway, so they did that play, and at that time when they did it again at the Globe, my sister and I were already alive. So we were in the audience, and that, I don't really have a strong memory actually of that, but I've been told that we both became kind of hysterical because my mother's character dies in that. And we flipped out. We were crying and screaming. My grandfather had to take us out of the theater because we were disrupting things. But it was very heart-wrenching. If you ever get to see that play, I do recommend it. It gets you. You don't think it's gonna, because it's kind of got some dated language in it, and it's kind of stilted. It's very strange. There's my father played Witch Boy, and he is a witch, and my mother isn't a witch, and he falls in love with her, and he wants to be with her, but he has to give up I can't even remember now, but it was like this very tragic leading up to this big moment where she dies. And he puts on her finger just before she dies. He puts a ring on her finger because he loves her. And the whole point is she has to survive for him to be able to be a real human. And as I vaguely recall, he puts the ring on her finger and she dies. And then my dad would like do this whole thing where his back is to the audience and she's laying there dead. And he kind of curls up and does this whole physical transformation and then turns around, and he doesn't remember he's a witch again. And so he takes the ring off her finger because they steal jewels from the graves. And it's just very dark at the moon, if you will. But so yeah, that's how they met. And my dad directed and acted throughout his life before he passed away. And as we grew up, my sister and brother and I, we'd go and visit him on the summers, and he would put us in the shows. So we did 1,000 musicals, all the old musicals. We were in all of them. And of course, we all acted in lots of theater in San Diego. That's how it all began. So when I was 4, somebody asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And an actor. I want to be an actor. I mean, what better job is there just to play and make believe, and then people clap and stuff and love me for it.
Basically, you had no choice, though, in this matter. You were just like, hey, you're going on stage. You're cast in this role. I mean, did it ever occur to you that like maybe you wanted to try something else?
I was always into animals. So yeah. I think, being a veterinarian was kind of like a thing for me at some point. But I'm sure if any one of us had said, I don't want to do it, we wouldn't have had to. We were all for it because it was just fun. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious though, like when you said maybe that, as you're getting older, you're like, hey, I want to pursue this. I want to do this for a living. I mean, were they like, well, hey, hold on a second, and give you a reality check, or were they just very supportive of your dream?
It was interesting. I'm sure in my mother's brain, my dad too, for that matter, probably had the thought of, oh my God, you want to do, just like I did with my daughter, who's now acting. Which when she decided to be an actor, you have that moment where you're just like, so hard, and it's not like a regular job. You don't know that you're going to get another paycheck. When the job ends, you never know if you're going to work again. And that goes through your brain. So it takes a certain kind of strength, I think, and determination. You really have to want it. And you have to be ready to take the hits and overcome that. To keep going. And the business, it's a hard business. I mean, between action and cut is fantastic. But all the other stuff can be rough. And not to mention, and I'll only mention this once, now the whole Me Too thing. During that period when I was working, there was a lot of danger for women. I'm not kidding. I mean, everywhere you looked, there was somebody who was possibly going to go the wrong way. And you had to be really have your sensories, you had to be ready for it. You had to know how to avoid it. And so my memory, when I look back, and I've talked to my daughter at length about this, I was constantly kind of trying to kind of navigate that. And so there was kind of a danger thing for women. And for men too, really. I mean, there were men who went through things as well. So I'm glad a lot of that has come out from under the rocks, and people are much more willing to speak about it publicly and defend themselves, kind of thing. And there's a lot of lovely people too. You just have to be ready, So I don't miss that part of the business, to be honest.
And I'm sorry for you if you had to go through any of that, and for anybody out there who has followed that career path and had similar problems. I'm hoping that, I can't speak from my personal experience, but I'm hoping that today things have improved, at least in that area.
I think it has. I mean, I can honestly say I've seen my daughter go through some of that, but she's not afraid to talk about it. People my age, I think we were much more, hey, if you want to work again, you don't say anything. You just don't speak up. If you did, nobody would hire you. That was the idea back then. And my daughter has gone through some stuff, and she's had to stand up for herself, and she's had to go through some hoops. I mean, it wasn't an easy thing. And she overcame. And so the newer generations are much more willing to just say, hey, that's not right. Stop what you're doing. I'm going to report it or whatever. But they put a stop to it. So I'm really proud of the younger women in the business, because they have, I think, a strength that many of us didn't feel were options that many of us didn't feel we had.
So you're growing up in this world of theater, and I'm kind of curious, how that takes you then from going on stage to going in front of a camera lens. So how did that transition happen?
Honestly, it took me years to remember this, but my whole goal was from San Diego, I was going to move to LA, and I was going to maybe get some commercial work. I was just going to make some money.
Yeah.
So really dive into some deep training, get better at dancing and singing, and do some real solid foundational work toward theater. Then I was going to move to New York and get on Broadway. That was my whole thing. That was what I was going to do. But I'll tell you, once I got myself an agent in LA, and I started getting sent out on all these different roles, and it was kind of a hard nut to crack when you don't have any film under your belt. You've got to prove yourself, and it's not easy for people to take a chance on somebody who's never done it before. So it wasn't easy. And once I got my first part, I was like, okay, foot's in the door. And then I think I did a couple co-star type of roles, were just a few lines here and there. And then I got Knight Rider, and I played a guest star part, which was, big part for a guest. And I thought, I made it, I really was so excited. And I was off and running in that direction, and I really didn't look back. And it wasn't until years later that I realized, geez, I was going to go to Broadway. What happened to that? I still did some theater in LA, but not any real big stuff. It was more experimental and new stuff. And so I kept my foot in that door too, and I always miss it, because it really is my first love. So that's how that happened. It was just it just happened. And it wasn't like I had a commercial agent. I think I had a commercial agent somewhere along the line for a very short period of time. I didn't like doing them, because it's really just mindless stuff in my brain. It's just not very challenging. And so I didn't enjoy it. The money was good, though. Commercial work can pay the rent.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you though, since you mentioned Knight Rider already, that was very, very early on in your career. I mean, IMDb has it as like I think your second TV credit. But I'd love to hear about your time working on that set. And did you get to hang out with the car at all?
Oh yeah, I was in the car. I was in the car a lot. And the car was, supposedly talking.
What is the car like in real life? I mean, are they a jerk? Did you get coffee with them after the shoot? How was Kit?
Well, Kit was, there were many, 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 many Kits. There was the Kit that could drive without a person driving. And so that's what I really remember, because the stunt guy they had this whole thing built inside of it so that he could be almost in a prone position and drive the car so you couldn't see him. And I do remember they had a whole thing built inside of there. And I think I may have done it in the car when that thing moved. I can't remember. But I certainly was there with the stunt guy. So I'm assuming he moved the car while I was in it. I just don't really recall. I haven't even seen that show in a very long time. But yeah, so I hung out with Kit. She was great, or he was great, whatever. Sorry.
It's kind of interesting too when I look at like the earlier years of your TV and film career. A lot of that is kind of like those detective or police dramas, because you have like you have the A-Team as well. You had the Perry Mason movie, which is always fun. Love to hear about those. But there's actually one show that you did that something I do like to actually ask folks about, because it's kind of obscure, I feel like. And you did a bunch of episodes of Hooperman with John Ritter.
Oh, yeah.
And I loved hearing stories about John Ritter. He left this place too soon. What a talent. I mean, he'd be getting an Oscar today. I feel like if he was still around, but
he was one of my all-time favorite people that I've ever met. He was such a good person and so funny. I mean, we had so much fun. I remember the first time I did Hooperman, I had just had my daughter. So she was 6 months old when I worked with him, and I was getting my feet wet. It was I was getting back to working, and was separated from my baby, which was rough. I was sort of navigating all of that while I was getting to know John. And I do remember, because he was so funny, I mean, we just stupid things. I mean, just really stupid slapstick, physical comedy stuff. And I would do it with him. And we'd walk onto the set, strangely, making people laugh. And that was such a gift for me, because I was, a new mom and kind of going through a lot of new things. And he just made me laugh all the time. And he was such a sweet person to me. And I loved him, I really loved him. And so when he passed, it hurt. It really hurt. That wasn't okay. He had a long way to go. You know what I mean? He had a lot of gifts to give us.
Yeah.
So yeah, he left too soon.
Yeah, I feel like he really only started to scratch the surface of what he wanted to do and what he wanted to accomplish, and it's a shame. Yeah,
it really was.
Attention all Starfleet personnel. New York's only fan-run Star Trek convention, Trek Long Island, is back this summer. Get ready for 3 days of sci-fi fun celebrating your favorite franchise in the Empire State. Meet the stars from Trek shows spanning different eras, including Melissa Navia and Yetide Badaki from Strange New Worlds, Gabrielle Ruiz from Lower Decks, Armin Shimmerman, Chase Masterson, J.G. Hertzler, and Kitty Swink from DS9, Ethan Phillips from Voyager, Janet Kidder, Tara Rosling, Conrad Coates, and Elias Tefexis from Discovery, and many more, including celebrities who haven't been at a Star Trek convention in years, like Clyde Kasatsu, Natalia Nogalich, and Daphne Ashbrook. Come meet your fellow fans. Take in a panel with your favorite podcasters. Enjoy Dinner with the Stars, featuring live musical performances. Meet authors, artists, and musicians, and so many more during this epic 3-day event brought to you by the talented and inclusive community that makes Star Trek go at warp speed. Trek Long Island takes place from May 31st to June 2nd at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Hauppauge, New York. Visit treklongisland.com for tickets, exclusive packages, and more information. Trek Long Island, going kindly this summer.
I do have an obscure thing I wanted to ask you about. I don't know if you're going to remember anything about this or not, but I was rummaging through the old IMDb, and I found something that I could barely find any footage or clips of. And you did, I think it was a TV movie that was called Long Arm.
Oh
And
yeah.
the reason I wanted to ask about that is because I know that Rene Auberjonois was in that film. I don't know if you got to cross paths with him because, again, like the only
Oh yeah.
footage I could find was this like maybe 15, 20-second really low res trailer for a commercial for it on TV. But yeah, I'd love to hear something about that because I mean, Rene is, again, he's one of my favorites on DS9. He's Odo. That's like my favorite character on DS9. I'd love to hear any stories you have about him.
Yeah, that's true. That is a connection. I'd forgotten about that.
There's
Yeah.
one.
He was a what was interesting, first of all, I knew who he was too because of his history, but I'd seen him in other things. I mean, there was some kind of wasn't he in that Western that he did with Warren, not Warren, yeah, Warren, was it Warren Beatty? Really old. I mean, way in the 70s or something. And it was such a great film. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, he was great. I remember he wore clogs. That's my main memory of him. He was kind of, don't remember him being very gregarious and, loud or, making, jokes or anything like that. He was just a solid actor, laid back. And we were in the dirt, man. We were out in the dirt doing the dirty work of Western work and horses and dust and weird weather happening. And he was always like in his little clogs and stuff when he would go to the set. I always thought that was kind of interesting. But he's such a good actor. I mean, what a great actor.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I wish I'd started this podcast earlier so I could have had a chance to maybe find a way to talk to him. Because, yeah, that's one of those guys. I haven't really been to many Star Trek conventions. I mean, I'm doing one coming up a little bit later this year that we'll be seeing you at. But, it's kind of a newer franchise, I guess, for me to be as hardcore as I am now. And Renee is just one of those people that I would have loved to have spent some time with. So, yeah, what a talent.
I will. He really was special. But I will say this real quick about that show. I get to do a lot of my own stunts.
Now, that's fun.
I did things that on another set, they would never have allowed me to do. But I knew how to ride horses. So I hung out with the wranglers when I wasn't actually working. I'd hang out with the wranglers and just ride. And they gave me the Marlboro horse, the horse that was in those old smoking commercials and billboards, that horse. And that horse was extraordinary. I've ridden a lot, and I'm telling you, that horse was amazing. I felt so comfortable on that horse. And so they started teaching me how to do things like I had to ride into one scene, at a pretty good clip, and then throw my leg over the front and slide off while the horse ran off. Never even really coming to a stop and getting off the horse. It was like one of those stunts. And so I did that. I jumped out of a barn from the top window, grabbed a rope, and screamed as I came down when the bale of hay. Yeah, it was I got to do all kinds of interesting things. The worst part was when I had to get in the water. I had to get into fake, it was supposed to be a hot springs, but instead of using the hot springs that they actually had around there, they built one, a really big one. And it took forever to heat. And the weather, we shot that in New Mexico. So the weather was extreme. Like it would be beautiful and sunny. And then all of a sudden it was hailing and windy and cold and crazy. So the whole crew, I remember, was bundled up with their hats and their gloves and their mops. And I mean, with hand warmers. And I was nude pretty much in a hot springs for 12 hours off and on, to the point where I would start to cry when they tell me, you got to get back in. We got to shoot now. And I mean, we had to do this so many times that it was so cold in there. They were throwing dry ice to make it look like it was steamy. And the water just got colder and colder and colder and colder. And to the point where I got hypothermic. I mean, I was definitely not well. I should have been to the doctor or something because I couldn't stop shaking for days. So that was the roughest. I never want to go through that again. And you never quite recover, I don't think, from that kind of exposure. You get colder quicker, I think. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I think.
Well, I mean, that's
And it
what
was
happens with a
cool.
traumatic experience, though. I mean, that's the kind of thing that sticks with you, even if it was only, 20 seconds or 20 hours, whatever it is, no matter how long that time is, it's still a trauma that stays with you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've heard other stories about people going through similar things, but they were talking about minutes. I was 12 hours going in and out of that water. They would make me get out, go get into a trailer to warm up. Then when they were ready to shoot, I got to go get back in. And the last time I said, I'm not, if I was in the water and they said, you got to get out and go warm up. And I was like, if I get out, I won't be able to make myself get back in. I can't do it again. And it was the cinematographer who came up to me and quietly said, you need to get out. You're going to get sick. Go get warm. And then I had to do it again. It was horrible. It was so horrible. It was so cold, man. Oh,
I mean, it's funny that you brought that up too, because that's literally the only thing I could find, like I mentioned, was this little TV 30-second, whatever it was, commercial for it. And that was the only scene I think of you in it. Like, it might have shown you actually jumping off the barn, but like that scene of you popping out of the water with your arms like this. And now I'm knowing that you're actually like legitimately freezing.
Totally frozen. And it was supposed to be hot. So you're trying not to look like you're freezing. Ha
Yeah.
ha ha. It was horrible. I'm now realizing the guy was in it too. I don't remember him at all going through. I don't remember him complaining at all, but yeah, he must have been in agony too. Anyway.
It kind of brings us back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, though, about Me Too, and really where we are here in like 2024, where, like you doing your own stunts, that would probably not be permissible today. I mean, this film, Long Arm, it really sounds like a real DIY kind of thing. And like, you shouldn't have been doing those stunts. You shouldn't have been riding the horse necessarily, and definitely shouldn't have been in the water like that. And that's kind of why we have things like intimacy coordinators and stunt coordinators on sets now. So, I mean, it's horrible that you went through that stuff, but at least it's hopefully reassuring to know that in theory, a lot less people will go through that today.
There are a lot more protections for women in particular, but men too. I mean, yes, there's stuff like Donner tells me, I'm just like, what? They have what? Wow. I mean, where it's really all written down in those intimacy scenes. I mean, it's all organized and it has to go through the SAG person who's on set, making sure all those things are followed. I went through some stuff that would never, ever have been allowed today, ever, with those intimacy scenes. So, yeah, whatever. It's a hard knock life, man.
Well, let's get a little sci-fi for a minute here, Daphne, because I'm not ready to go into Trek yet, but I do want to get a little bit timey-wimey, perhaps. And I do want to talk to you about Doctor Who, the movie, where you played Dr. Grace Holloway. And I know, again, you've done a lot of Doctor Who conventions, so I'm sure you've talked about this already a ton. But, I'm a Who fan also, but I've never actually seen the movie up until this week when I was starting to do my homework for this interview.
Oh, okay.
And it was very 90s, very unique kind of thing. I'm curious to hear your stories about this film, though, because, I mean, this seemed like just such like, a mismatch almost with the Doctor Who franchise. But I'm curious to know, first off, just what the production experience was like. I mean, was this kind of like a meant to be a real big kind of thing? Because it really is like a TV made for movie, essentially.
Yeah, it was a pilot, essentially, but we all call it, most of us call it a movie. It was like, it ended up being a movie of the week because they didn't pick it up. It did not become a series, sadly, but it was sort of, I look at it as a bridge between the classic Doctor Who and the new Doctor Who, which there was I think, about a 7-year period between both. Mm-hmm. They had canceled Doctor Who for about 7.5 years. They wanted to bring it back. For the first time, the BBC merged, if you will, with American companies like Fox and Universal. And we shot the film in Canada. And there was some money behind it. I'd never been on a set that had that kind of detail and extravagant. I mean, big. The TARDIS was amazing, and the Cloister Room, I think it's called, was extraordinary. Really big, beautiful, detailed, great art. I mean, just extraordinary. I was so impressed. And it was so helpful as an actor to be on that kind of a set. I mean, just can't help but be affected by it. You don't have to imagine everything. It's right there in front of you. So that was great. The crew was fabulous. As far as the part, and goes, I didn't get a lot of roles that were kind of like Dr. Grace Holloway, where there was this repartee kind of almost like, I felt like it was one of those old films, working with Paul, where there was this tit for tat, quick repartee, quick, funny, hopefully. And we got to really delve into that kind of experience. And for me, it was kind of rare. So when I read it, I thought, oh my God, this is funny. This is cute. I like this. And, I also liked the whole regeneration thing. I wasn't familiar with Doctor Who at all. So when I read the part about the Doctor regenerating, I was like, that's cool, because I like that kind of stuff. So I thought, this is great. And then I started to learn after I got the part. I think I maybe knew that it was an old series that was running for like 35 years in England. Maybe I knew that when I auditioned, right before I auditioned. After I got it, I started to learn the gravity, the weight, how much about, like, I really don't want to let anybody down here. I want to make sure I get this right. It was meant to be an introduction for Americans, even though there were Americans who knew about Doctor Who, the classic series, but it wasn't a vast audience in America. So, I think it was meant to be sort of like, let's introduce this to America. And so there was a lot to do in that 1 hour and a half. We had to make sure to respect the original Doctor Who stuff and doctors and companions and storylines and all of that. We needed to really tip our hat to the originals, if you will, and also introduce to a whole audience that many of whom had never heard of Doctor Who, and also bring in some new stuff, modernize a little bit. And so, I mean, even though it is a dated movie, back then, the tech was kind of at the cutting edge. The stuff that's in that film was the best we could do at that time in history of filmmaking. So I think what we had to accomplish in that short period of time, I think we did pretty good. I think there was some controversy. I mean, there was the kiss that everybody freaked out about. I didn't know anything about it. Thank God. I guess I was learning on the set that we had to have a discussion about what that kiss was going to be and how it was going to be done. And then, of course, years after the fact, I find out that it was a huge controversy. The Doctor doesn't kiss, what the heck? And they were not happy.
Yeah, that's an unusual thing here for folks who haven't seen it. Just so that they know, like, your character is the first one to ever romantically kiss a doctor. That really had not happened at that point, which is a pretty wild thing. And it does happen, in my opinion, really quickly, too. I mean, it's like 30 minutes into the movie, you're smooching.
Yeah, it was a chaste kiss. I mean, we really straddled the fence there. We didn't go full throttle with it at all. It was, I don't feel like it was a sexual kiss. It was a romantic kiss, but I don't think it was a sexual kiss. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I saw it. It was quick and it was heartfelt and it was the end of the film and it was basically saying goodbye. And I'm also the companion that said, "Now that's a camel. I don't want to go with you."
Which I couldn't believe, by the way. When I saw that, I was like, "Wait a minute, she's not going to be like, it had been picked up in a series." I was like, "Does that mean Grace isn't coming along for the ride? Like, what's up with that?"
Well, that's interesting because I did not audition for that part, knowing that I was going to be, if it got picked up in the series. Usually, there's a contract you sign up for. If it gets picked up, you're working for 7 years potentially on this show. I didn't have that. I was a one-off. So the way it was written, I don't think I was initially supposed to be a person that came along with the ride if it got picked up. I do know that I think it was a week before we wrapped, one of the Mucky Mucks came up and asked me if I would be interested. And if it gets picked up, would you like to come along? And I was like freaked out. I was like, yeah. I mean, who wouldn't? So if it had gotten picked up, I'm fairly certain they probably would have said, he comes back and convinces her, or something happens, and she ends up coming along and experiencing craziness that is Doctor Who for a couple more years anyway. Too bad.
Right. I agree with that, because it kind of makes me wonder, like, what could have happened? What could have been had the series been picked up?
Yeah. Would have been fun. Paul was great to work with too. He was such a good actor, and he was a joy, because it was like a tennis match, and he always hit the ball back. And I always, it was really fun to work with him.
Yeah.
And
when I was like watching it, like, it's funny you mentioned the repartee you guys have, because like in my head, I was thinking classic movies, and I was like, this is totally the Thin Man series right here between you two.
Yeah. I mean, it was a beautiful experience in that way. It reminded me of theater, honestly. Just well written, lots of fun dialogue. And it was just unique for me in my career. For that experience is unique. I don't think I've done a part outside of Doctor Who that was like that. That had that kind of levity, quick, smart, back and forth. Everything else is a little more traditional American stuff. A little heavier, lands a little hard.
Well, I'm glad to hear that Paul McGann was really wonderful to work with, though, because he was an interesting doctor, and it's sad we didn't get a ton of time with him necessarily right now. But I do want to ask you about Eric Roberts, and I had heard like a few notes about him that working with him wasn't exactly the best experience. And what was he like on set?
I'm going to chalk it up to this, because I've gotten to know him a bit, and I think he's a sweetheart. I think he was going through some stuff at that point, but I also think he's kind of methody, and he was the bad guy. And so when he'd come on the set, everybody was kind of like, it would change. There was an energetic change. When Paul and I, which was 90% of the time, were working together, we were just having fun. We were laughing in between takes, and it was a night shoot most of the time. So that can get a little strange, because you're just sort of, up all night, sleeping in the day. It's kind of isolating. It's a different experience. So we were just having fun. When Eric would show up, it would get a little tense. It would get a little bit, whoa, he's here. So, there was an interesting experience and dynamic there. I think part of it was the character he was playing, and kind of a methody kind of thing going on there, and just that period of time. But I thought it was devoted. He was all the way going there, did his thing. And so I think it benefited the show. Yeah. I think he did a good bad guy.
He definitely did. He was a very, very evil bad guy. I mean, it's weird though, because this is like a 90s Doctor Who kind of thing. So it does feel very 90s, for better or for worse, looking back at it today. And I think, the material he had to work with was that kind of mustache twirling villain that I like to say on this podcast all the time. It's very over the top kind of version of the Master. But it's a fun movie. It is actually a fun movie. It's a shame that it didn't get picked up. And I'm kind of curious, like, what did you think of it at the time? And do you have any inkling of what happened and why it didn't continue after that film?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this. First of all, I wasn't good, and probably still am not very good at watching myself. I don't enjoy it. Never really have. I don't even think, for me anyway, it's a healthy thing. Actor-wise, like, the way I think of acting is the last thing you want to do is think like an actor when you're acting. You want to just be the person. You don't want to have something going on in your head where you're seeing yourself. And it shows, I think, when actors are looking at themselves in their head, it shows in the acting. It's not conducive to a really super honest performance. I did go to the premiere in LA, and I couldn't watch it. I sat in the back. I knew I was going to have a problem. And when I watched the thing with the dress and the running and that thing, and I was just like, I can't do it. So I had to go out and just wait. So that was me with my own neuroses, just making sure that I couldn't do it. So initially, I think people thought, well, we didn't get great ratings because I think we aired on the same night the big finale on Roseanne happened.
That'd do it.
He had a heart attack. It was a big deal. And so people were kind of focused on that and not on our show. I have since heard that the ratings weren't that bad, that it was really down to Universal having another sci-fi show called Sliders going at the time. And they had their first season under their belt. And they had decided that if they picked Sliders up for another season, that would be their quota for sci-fi. So they did pick up Sliders and decided then not to pick up Doctor Who. So that's what the Universal, I guess. So that's what I've heard since. And I don't know if that's true. But that's what I've heard. And it kind of makes sense because I thought our show was great. I think it had some legs and it could have, Doctor Who, come on.
I mean, it's kind of wild to think about that. And ultimately, we should mention, of course, Jerry O'Connell from Sliders, now part of the Star Trek universe, which is kind of fun. So there's another connection for you hiding in there. Not so direct, but it's crazy to think that, an established franchise like Doctor Who was not picked up for that, which is just, what a shame.
That's what I've heard. And then I thought, well, maybe that's because I actually have heard people say, yeah, the ratings weren't that bad. Considering that we were opposite that one big finale or a big moment on another tried and true long running show, but no, it was actually business.
Yeah. I can tell you guys had fun on that set though. Watching it and seeing, especially during the ambulance motorcycle chase, that was just really fun to me. And also just because you can maybe tell me if I'm right or wrong here. I felt like a bunch of those scenes were just basically you and Paul sitting on a motorcycle stationary and the camera guy just doing some kind of wobbling. Because I felt like there's this building in the background. It's never moving. Do you remember anything about that?
You're probably right. I don't really recall. I know we did move on that.
There are some parts where we are moving, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe when we were doing the dialogue, I'm sorry, my memory is.
It, yeah.
But we probably did do some kind of shoddy, make it look like they're driving.
You were doing some Star Trek space acting, basically.
That's right. That's right.
So right now, there's been some rumors that Paul McGann is currently filming a new season of Doctor Who devoted to the Eighth Doctor. And if this was happening, I'm sure you cannot tell us anything if you are, but is there any interest, let's say, in perhaps returning to the role of Dr. Grace Holloway?
On my part?
Yes.
Sure. You know what I mean? Yeah, that would be fun. Are you kidding? Anything that wonderfully fun, and working with Paul again would be fantastic. And it's a great show. And so, yeah, sure, on my part. I don't know that there's any interest on anyone else's part, though. I haven't heard anything. Nobody's called me. Okay.
All right. So we're putting out there into the universe right now that this is happening. They need to give Daphne Ashbrook a call. Hey, everybody. We'll get right back to the interview in 1 second, but I wanted to remind you all to check out Trek Untold over at Patreon. Patreon is the best way to directly support creators of things you like through a monthly subscription of an amount that you can choose. Trek Untold has a few different tiers already with different benefits, ranging from early access to episodes, the ability to ask a future guest questions, exclusive merchandise, and other bonuses that I'd love to offer, but first I need to grow that Patreon community to do that. Trek Untold has been around since mid-2020 and has grown a ton since then, thanks to listeners and viewers like you. Through a platform like Patreon, you can help me keep improving the quality of each episode and keep bringing you new interviews with folks that make the Star Trek universe what it is. If this community can grow more over on Patreon, I can offer new perks like watch parties, exclusive Trek Untold episodes, being able to directly interact with guests, and other things, but in order to do that, I need to know my audience wants these things. The best way to tell me what you want is by supporting us on Patreon, so please, check us out at patreon.com/TrekUntold today and become a bigger part of the Trek Untold family. And now, back to the interview. Now, as we're going along here, Daphne, I was wondering when you were going to confess something to me, because we do have something a little bit heinous to talk about here.
Okay.
And I'm kind of curious to know about this here. I think it's time to talk about those murders that you committed.
Oh, yeah. I was a horrible murderer.
Yeah, because you were a 3-time murder veteran in Murder, She Wrote.
4.
4-time? Oh, my goodness. I missed one?
I think I did 4.
I think I have 3 here for you. Unless there's a hidden... Who else did you kill that I don't know about? Who are you confessing to now?
I tried to kill Florence Henderson.
Haven't we all, though?
Didn't do it right, so she survived. I don't remember who else I was trying to kill, but I know I tried to killed at least 2 other people. I thought there were 4. Am I wrong?
There might have actually been, yeah, you might be right, actually, because it's 3 episodes and I think 4 murders in that case, because I think you did double duty in the 3rd episode you did. And just to kind of run down all the names here, because, like we said here, you're doing 3 episodes of Murder, She Wrote, which is, I love to talk about that on this podcast. And there are so many Star Trek connections to these three appearances, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, there actually are a bunch. There's a few. I mean, Murder She Wrote is packed with Star Trek alumni, and even beyond that, I mean, we all know that Murder She Wrote was packed with a lot of like celebrities of yesteryear and modern times as they were kind of coming up in the world.
Right.
I just want to run down a few names here on your show here. These are not all Trek names, but as far as the 3 episodes that you did, there was Florence Henderson, you already mentioned, Jimmy Dean, Gary Grubbs, everybody knows as one of the most Southern guys ever on TV and films.
Loved him.
Yeah, and that was for Ballad for a Blue Lady. And then talking Trek alumni, right? Let's jump over to Dear Deadly, your second appearance, which had Lawrence Luckinbill, who folks will know as Sybok from Star Trek V, John Rhys Davies, who was in Voyager, and the person you killed, Trek alumni DeMar, Casey Biggs.
Okay. Wow.
And then your third episode, which was Nailed, had DS9's Rosalind Chow.
All right. I love her.
She's amazing.
I love her so much. Oh my God.
And of course, many other talented performers. But yeah, I got to tell you too, before we get into the questioning here, I wanted to throw your way. This was hilarious for me watching it because I don't remember these episodes and I love watching the show. So I'm watching it. I'm like, okay, first episode, and it's you who's the killer. I watch the next one. It's you who's the killer again. And I'm like, there's no way she's going to go for a trifecta. I get to the end of the third episode. I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me, Daphne? 3 times a murderer? That's like unheard of.
I was so good at doing murders. I was.
You're the wrong line of work.
I was also murdered many times. I've even written a book about this stuff.
That's your memoirs.
Dead Woman Laughing. I've died a bunch of times and I've murdered a bunch of times. And I used to think that this was normal. I mean, every actor has to. I know I went through a period of time where I started asking other actors, so how many people have you killed? Or how many times have you died? And then we'd go, none, never did it. And I thought, why? Why is all this death around me? Very strange. So yeah, I even died in Doctor Who, for goodness sake.
That's true. When don't you die? Come on, Daphne.
Right? I mean, oh my goodness. Yeah. Life.
Yeah.
And death.
On a more positive note and less murderous, I'd love to hear any stories you have about working with Angela Lansbury. And the fact that you got to work with her 3 times is just a wonderful thing. And also, again, you're surrounded by some real great cast in these episodes. There's some like wonderful actors you get to work with here.
Yeah, I loved working with Eileen Brennan. Do you know that she was in the one about, what was it, a newsroom?
Yep, that was Dear Deadly. Dear Deadly.
So I loved working with her. She was crazy, wonderfully crazy. So she was fun. The hardest part about doing Murder, She Wrote, Angela was lovely. I mean, and obviously brilliant, but and wonderful in a lot of ways was that she, got to be. She was in every scene. She was always working. I mean, the woman. And how long was that show on? How many decades?
That was 12 seasons. And you were in the last season, actually, in fact.
So that's exhausting. And she had, when I started working until I finished working and murdering people on that show, she had a thing in her contract. She could only work 4 days. It might be a 9-day shoot, but she was only working for 4 days. So we had to get everything with Angela shot in the can before her husband, who was her manager, would walk her blissfully off the set. And if we did not have everything shot with Angela, tough beans. So there was a lot of pressure on that set to get it done. And there was a lot because she was in almost everything. You really were crunching at it was like, don't mess up your lines, hit your mark, get it right. There was a lot. It was a little bit of a pressure cooker. And, Eileen, she didn't work that way. That's what I remember. She's one of those artists that does it different every time. Super creative. Just, really just in the moment. Wonderful. But when you're doing something that's like, you got to pick up that coffee cup with that right hand on that line that you did in the master shot so that we can match it to everything else we're shooting. And she didn't work like that. So it was tough. If you didn't have that kind of understanding and that technical thing in the back of your brain while you're working, still trying to just be an actor, just be free, be one with the role and all of that. But also remember what you did, which arm you put your shoulder strap of your purse on, at what line you did that, when did you turn away, all these things had to be duplicated, and she struggled with that. It wasn't easy for her, but I at that time had a pretty good brain that could work on that level, so I could remember things. I don't know why, but at that time I could do that. I know weird, and even I would do weird things like in the master shots. I would find that later that, oh no, I put the purse on my left arm. I'm right-handed. I never would have done that normally. And I started wondering why I would use my left hand to do things that I wouldn't do. And I thought, why is that? And I thought, because I'm using my right brain, which means, is that right? It was a creative side of the brain that I was operating from when I was shooting the master, which is the first time you do it usually. It's like you're shooting the big shot. So you're doing it for the first time and you're just creating. And then you want to duplicate everything after that when you come in closer, closest. So that's what I like in that too. I would do things that I wouldn't naturally do because I was operating from completely creative right brain place, meaning the left would pick up the slack. I have no idea if any of that is true or not, but that's what I like it to do because I can understand. It actually took some effort to go, no, you picked up the purse with your left hand. Don't forget that on that line. Get it right. And on that show, it was super important you remember things like that because we just didn't have time.
I think you just had the mind of a murderer. That's what it was.
Yeah, that whole murder thing, man. Yeah. I remember one of the characters, I think it was the last murderer I played on that show.
There's so many murderers that you've been. I mean, it's hard to keep track.
It's so hard to remember all of them. But I do remember Angela saying to me, "You're a sociopath." And I was like, I know. That was our big little, she was just like bringing it home. Crazy murderer that I was. So, yeah.
So, Daphne, let's beam into our Star Trek discussion at last here. And we're talking DS9 Season 2, the episode named after your character, Melora.
Right.
This normally is a question I ask, but since you already answered, I was going to ask, had you auditioned for Star Trek before? But there was Star Trek 4. Had there been any other Star Trek auditions, though, besides that?
No. I mean, I wouldn't even have put those two. Yeah, no. I do that. That film had to come. I don't know when it came. I don't remember time.
Yeah, it would have been before DS9.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're right. Yeah, no, I never auditioned for a series for Star Trek until that one part came along. And again, it was one of those things where it's like, this is a challenge. This is, first of all, the language, forget about it. That was another thing. They're going to let you miss a word in that. You had to get all the thes and the ands and all the little, it didn't matter, all the great gobbledygook stuff that you're like, what does this mean? I don't even know what this means. You kind of had to do your research and figure out what the hell you were talking about. It's like another language, really. But you couldn't miss any word. So if you messed up, they made you go all the way back to the first paragraph 3 pages ago and do it all again and get it right. So that was tough. Also, it was a challenge because I wore these braces and they weren't metal. They were plastic. And, and you're wearing the jumpsuit. Well, if you got to go use the restroom during the day, like normal humans do, I had to take everything off. And that stuff would break. And so the poor prop guys were constantly coming up and duct taping. Thank God it was silver because they could just silver duct tape all over me. So that was tough. And I just stopped drinking liquid altogether. I was like, I'm not going to have to take this. I'm not going to do it. Forget food and liquid. It's just going to be a get the words right kind of day. That was a 9-day shoot. And because of all of the makeup, which I think took 4.5 hours.
Yeah, that was some wild makeup here because we're talking now, just to kind of set the stage here, Starfleet uniform, like you just said, with the braces that are across your body. So we're now very restricted physically. And now you're also doing these prosthetics. And I'm kind of curious, have you done prosthetics to that amount previously on TV and film?
I'm not sure if this was previously. I think it was. I can't even remember the name of the show, but it was a show where I had acid on my face. It was like a whole side of my head had to be messed up. And so that took some time. I don't know what that show was. Probably another sci-fi thing. That might have been prior to, but I just don't recall. No, I've never been through anything like what I went through on that show. I mean, the 4.5 hours, forget about it. So I averaged maybe 3 hours of sleep a night if I was lucky, because it was also 19. I think I worked my longest day on that show, which was 20 hours of shooting.
Wow.
And then I was there with the little hair and makeup person well before anyone else was there to start getting back into the whole head and hair. So yeah, that was rough. Luckily, I lived really close to Paramount, which is where we were shooting. So I had maybe a 5-minute drive to get home. No, it took 45 minutes to get it off too. So everyone else was home by the time they got this thing off my head, and I would go home, fall into bed, get back up, shower, back into the chair, 4.5 hours. Boom. It was rough.
Yeah, I don't envy you for playing that part.
Oh, and I get to fly.
You did get to fly. I wanted to ask you about that because you got to
Peter
do some wire
Pan,
work.
man.
I mean, I know there's like some parts that are most likely not you that I think they had a double for, like some of the double backflips and stuff. But for the most part, a lot of that is you with Alexander Siddig just floating around. That's got to be really an interesting day at the job.
Yeah, that was really fun. I mean, every young actor probably thinks, one day I'll be Peter Pan and I'll get to...
You got to live your Mary Martin dreams
really.
that day.
Just floating. Floating is different than flying, so it was a little bit different. It was uncomfortable, the harness. I'm not going to lie. It was uncomfortable. But so what? And it was cool and it was fun and it was different. And they did, I think one of the rumors was they wanted to bring the character back, or at least others like her. But because technically we were challenged at that time, they had to, I think it was every second of film, they had to paint the strings out. So it was a constant effort to make all of the apparatus disappear and make it look like we were actually floating. So it was costly. And that's why they never brought any of my type of characters back. That's what I've heard anyway. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was a great experience. I have some pictures of the behind the scenes. I actually was at a convention 1,000 years ago, sitting next to a man, and I was telling somebody the story of the flying and the breaking plastic, and I was going through the whole thing. And the man sitting next to me, I wish I could tell you his name. I'm so bad. He turned to me and he said, "So you know the prop guy that taped up all of your plastic stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, I was that guy. And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "I have some pictures for you." And he had all these pictures of behind the scenes stuff where, we were getting ready to shoot. I was hanging in the air and the strings, you could see all the strings and all the people and the crew people all kind of, it was very interesting to kind of get that perspective on it. But that was so ironic. But yeah, it was a tough shoot. Went right into a Western a week after I finished shooting that show.
That's a pretty big change in pace right there.
Another Western that I can't tell you the name of. Oh, no, can't remember. You got to go on IMDb. I don't know.
Well, we'll hunt for that one later, but I do want to kind of come back to something we talked about a little bit earlier with Doctor Who, and that would be your romantic smoochy kiss with the Doctor. Here you are now in DS9 having what I think is like one of the most fascinating and unique kisses in sci-fi history, and that's you floating around with Alexander Siddig. I just wonder about shooting that scene, because, I mean, it's got to be you guys coming together and doing that and then twirling off or whatever. I mean, do you remember anything about shooting that part?
It dawned on me one day. I was like, "Oh my God, I kissed both those doctors. That's interesting."
Got a thing for doctors.
Totally. Both British too, weirdly. So yeah, that was it was a challenge, because at that point we were, close up. And so we were not we weren't actually hanging from the strings at that point. We were standing on some kind of scaffolding or something they'd built. And we had to make it look like we were floating. So we had to kind of do a whole kiss where we're acting like we're actually just floating in air, which I thought was interesting. I thought I did a really good job at that too. If I do say so myself, that's not easy. You gotta do a whole, I'm floating and kissing and then floating. So yeah, it was a hoot. Very interesting. But I'm kissing, I'm killing, I'm dying. That's my life as an actor.
You're the total package, Daphne. Well, let's talk a little more about Melora, the character now, because this is a very, very unique character in Star Trek history, and really even just across sci-fi, because you've got this character who is essentially physically not able to do the same things as everybody else on the show. The script is very much addressing that. It's a major part of the storyline for this, and you have to play this role, and you are a physically abled actor. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on the character and what you thought about the message of this episode, because again, very different. I feel like even from just like what you would have seen on any TV show at that time period.
I did a play called Duet for One where I was in a wheelchair the whole time. So that was one thing. But this was, I think, after all of these other jobs. So my first experience, and I know it was my first one because actually they gave me a wheelchair to practice with. And I took it to a shopping mall. And I rolled around in it to see what that experience was like. First of all, you feel very short. And also, I noticed people wouldn't look at you directly. They would just avoid eye contact. It was very interesting. It was almost like being invisible in some ways. So that was an interesting thing. And I was getting used to the chair. And then this role came along with Deep Space. And it was an electric wheelchair, which was different. That's a whole different ball of wax, if you will. So I had to learn, because that thing was powerful. Thank God, because I was on ramps and stuff, as I recall. I was having to go over all these weird things. So it was actually a lot easier to manipulate in a lot of ways. You didn't have to physically get yourself, up and over things, which was nice. Thank goodness. As far as the pain that character, Melora, dealt with, my grandmother, when I was a kid, was in a lot of pain and was in a wheelchair. She had debilitating arthritis. And I remember all through my young childhood watching her, the pain that she was in I don't know how she did it, honestly. She really had to endure a lot. And so I drew on that. As far as movement, getting in and out of the chair, walking with the cane, that was all my Grammy. That's what I drew from. I also have a cousin who's in a wheelchair, and she's not necessarily in pain all the time, but she's definitely restricted. And so that came into play as well. But yeah, the man who wrote the episode was wheelchair bound, and he showed up on the set and we had a chat. It was a big deal for him. And I don't even know, well, I guess I could have gotten away with it because these days now, if you're wheelchair bound, you got to use somebody who's wheelchair bound. They don't like that. But because I had to get up and walk and do other things, that changes the scenario there. But, it was a big deal for him. I know he'd been working on that character and on that episode for quite a while. And it was a big moment for him. And we talked about the challenges of being handicapped, if you will. And again, I felt that weight of representing something in the proper way. So I felt kind of privileged that I was, if that's the right word, that I got to represent people who go through those things every single day. So it was a challenge, but it was a good challenge. And I was proud that I could maybe put it on screen for people to actually experience. They've never had that experience of being around somebody, human beings, and they're as restricted as they, are from their physical ailments, but their mental is there. Like my cousin, for went to Berkeley and graduated with high marks. I mean, she's nothing stopping her, so it was a great experience in that way for me.
This is one of those episodes that I see talked about at least like once or twice a week in different Star Trek Facebook groups that I'm in, because folks are always like, especially if they discover it for the first time, they're like, wow. And it really does then open up a lot of conversation, because in 1993, it was a very, very progressive kind of episode. And here in 2024, it still is, but there's also some like problematic stuff here and there. And the view has kind of changed a little bit, not necessarily to be completely negative, let's say, but the perspective of it has kind of changed at some points that you brought up as well, like about how here's a physically able person playing this role. So I'm curious, for you looking back on this now, I mean, what is your perspective on the story of the episode itself now, essentially 30 years later?
I think that I thought a lot about this kind of thing where there's restrictions now for people that are. It's kind of probably shouldn't even try, because I'm not intelligent enough to do this well. But I think it's a good thing. I think a lot of people have been neglected and restricted from certain roles or any roles in the business, and I think it's really important that is breaking down. Those barriers are being broken down, and people are getting to step up and be brilliant. But the one selfish thing I have to say about it is, like, it does take away some really wonderful challenge from an artistic place for a person who is not physically challenged in a real way. I don't even know how to put it, but it reduces some of the gray parts, that would have challenged me as an actor. But c'est la vie, so what? Get over it. I had my time. There's so many wonderful actors. I've just been binging Deadwood. And there's a fabulous actor on that. I should know her name. I should find out what her name is. She plays Jewel in that show. And she's a handicapped person. I'm not certain what it is, but she has physical challenges, and it's real. And I remember the first time I saw that show, which was years and years ago, I was like, wow, this is great. This is so great. And I'm just recently watching it again, and I'm just like, she was so great. She was such a great actress, and she was just beautiful. And I was really proud of that show for going ahead and going for it. And now it's like, I think there's a lot of that going on now, which makes me happy that the business is growing and allowing everybody in, which I've always felt as an actor coming from the theater. That's, I think, my favorite thing about the theater. It's like everybody's invited. If you can get in and do the part, everybody's part of the family. And it's much more of that kind of vibe in theater. And so I feel like that is just now really starting to come into its own in the film industry. People that look different are getting parts, and great parts. Thank God. Thank God. Represent. We come in all shapes and sizes, folks.
I think that's a very honest and human reaction that I have to that, especially from the acting perspective of how, everybody wants to play any part. And that's kind of the thing we hear all the time, is like the best actor should get the role. We hear that thing all the time, and it's not necessarily the right statement. I mean, let's take a look at a different role. Let's take a look at Daniel Day-Lewis in My Left Foot. And here is a very physically able person playing this kind of a character. I don't know if that would fly today. So yeah, what you're saying, I totally get, but you're absolutely right, though. I mean, now it's the chance for everybody to really become that inclusive kind of world that acting should be. So like I said, c'est la vie.
Yeah, it's c'est la vie. Maybe if you really want that challenge, go do My Left Foot in a stage play. Maybe then, I don't know, but even that probably wouldn't fly today. But it does reduce where you can go as a creative person. But c'est la vie.
One of the things too that kind of also almost bugged me out this episode too was it's such a sci-fi thing. How a lot of the plot of this episode is about curing Melora. And that's just a very 90s thing too, I feel like, where it's kind of like almost taking a disability and saying, oh, but we could probably get around it. And it's almost like a very ableist kind of view of what they're trying to accomplish here. I don't know if you've ever considered that aspect as well.
I did not. I think that knowing who wrote it, I'm thinking, okay, I can see how cool that was because she does have that option. They can fix things and make it so that she doesn't have to go through the pain. But her choice is, no, she could have even stayed home. That was the other thing about the character. She didn't have to leave the planet. She could have stayed there and not had to go through all of the challenges, physical challenges that she ends up having to face when she's not in her homeland. And it was like, no, I'm powerful enough that I can deal with what this brings. It's me. It's who I am. It's what I have to deal with. And I'm okay with that. Let's just stick to what's real. So there's some kind of empowerment, I think, when it comes to her making those choices. She's a really strong woman.
It kind of reminds me of another episode I did of this podcast where I interviewed an actor named Howie Seago, and he is deaf. And his episode of TNG was all about that. And it was written by, a deaf person as well. And that episode was essentially similar about, someone who is not able to hear in the same way that most other people can hear. And originally one of the plot ideas was that maybe he would be quote unquote cured of it, or he would be doing these different things that didn't really fit with how deaf people actually function in real life. So it's kind of curious. DS9 is doing this kind of same thing that TNG accomplished. And it's great to have that kind of representation and be as accurate as it can be, especially for the times that it came out in.
Right. I think of Children of the Lesser God. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but and this was way back. So what, in the 80s?
Yep.
The first one. So the main female lead was deaf. And then they carried it over with Marley in the movie. And I thought, yeah, I mean, that's just the way to do it. I think I really do feel that, it's great as a challenge for an actor, but look what we would have lost had we not go ahead and done the right thing, which is to hire a person who is deaf and who can, what's the problem? It was perfect. And both of those actresses were absolutely brilliant. And we would never have known that otherwise. So yeah, it's the right thing to do morally, and it's the right thing to do creatively. I mean, two freaking brilliant performances right there. So it's exciting to see these changes happening. Thank God.
Now, you mentioned the difficulty of these characters and how they did have to get around the set and such. So, we know it would have been a little bit challenging to have Melora come back, but was that something that was ever thrown around?
I don't think so. I don't. If it was, it certainly wasn't. I wasn't privy to it. So I heard that kind of rumor after the fact, and it might have been at some kind of a convention or something. I don't think it was a discussion on the set or anything like that. Maybe it was. Like, we had 4.5 hours in the chair with the hair and makeup lady, and they know everything, those people. So maybe she said something like, yeah, they're thinking about, maybe that kind of conversation happened at that point, but it's not something specific that I remember. It's just, I don't remember the specific conversation, but I do remember that specifically being said at some point, that was an idea that they would have liked to maybe, but it's just too expensive. I think it was $10,000 a second to paint out those lines.
Oh, that's wild. Now, I normally don't ask this type of question on this podcast because I never like to get like this kind of Trekkie with my guests. But and again, I don't know if you're the kind of actor that will theorize about this, but do you ever think about Melora and what her life would have been after this episode happened?
No.
Okay. Then we'll move on.
I don't think I have. I mean, she would have continued on being her, doing her mapping and whatever the hell she was doing. She would have been in pain. Who knows? Maybe she would have changed her mind after 10 years of that kind of pain. Maybe in her older age when she was retiring, would have said, hey, let's do that operation thing. Let's do that. I don't know.
Now, I know you mentioned earlier you don't like to see yourself in roles that you've done, but I mean, for this role from Melora, did you happen to watch yourself on DS9 just to see how it looked with the wheelchair or anything like that?
I'm sure I did, because back in those days, you kind of had to do a reel for your auditions, like an old VHS reel of parts that you put, a compilation of work you've done. So I had to work at least once or twice at watching something and going, okay, that scene, let's edit that. So I'm sure I saw that. I haven't since. And the first time I would see something, all I did was see what I looked like, which is not pleasant. And then the second time I would watch it, I would maybe focus on the acting. And then the third time I could actually watch the show and experience the show, like maybe a little bit like an audience member. So and the initial time was always the hardest because you're just looking at yourself. And so you got to get past all that crap and then look at the work. And as far as reels go, you got to pick out the scene that you think is going to work with your reel. And so, I had to go through that back in the olden days. Nowadays, I think somebody else does it for you. You know what I mean? I don't think you have to do that yourself anymore. I don't know.
All right, so Daphne, that's our Trek talk here, but I want to now go into our lightning round as we start to wrap up this interview here. And I'd like to ask you a few quick questions here. We'll see what your responses are to this. First one here. What was the best day you ever had on a set? And what was the worst day you ever had in a set?
It depends on the perspective, but like where I'm coming from. I will say this. I did a miniseries called Intruders, and I had to do a very challenging scene where I was under hypnosis, which was like having to do a 5-page monologue. Not easy to do. And it was super emotional and challenging, and I had to prepare a lot. When I nailed that scene and finished shooting it, I felt like I had accomplished something. So that was a good day. But there's also really fun days where it's just fun to be alive. But that's what I'll choose for the best day as an actor on a set. The other thing is the worst one. I'm going to tell you, hypothermia is not any fun. So that might have been the worst thing that physically that I had to go through. It just hurt, and it hurt for days afterward. It wasn't fun. So I'll go with that.
Now, it's funny. I was going to even just chop that question off my interview here, but I'm so happy I asked you about Long Arm now. Cause as horrible as it was, I'm happy you got that story out there.
There were a lot of challenges on that show, but it was mostly a fabulous time. Riding a horse all day long. Come on.
Yeah.
That great animal. Oh, so good.
How about the role that you are most proud of? Like if there was one role that you were going to tell your people, your fans to see you, and this is the one that you think you did your best in, what would that role have been?
I did a pilot called Sisters. It came out at the same time that the other Sisters show came out, and they got picked up and we didn't. So, so my pilot became sort of movie of the week kind of a deal. That part was great. And it was super challenging, and I fought really hard for that part, really wanted it. So I'll go with that one. I don't know if it's anything anybody can see anymore, but that was probably my favorite all-around experience.
What's something that you know today that you wish Daphne Ashbrook knew when she was younger?
That I had more power than I thought I had, as far as being able to accomplish things, do things, protect myself. I wish I had a little less fear as a younger person, being an actor in this business. So I think that's what I would have liked to have been able to say. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine.
What's the most valuable lesson that somebody has taught you, whether that's about life or your profession, that you still think about and use today?
My acting coach was Harry Master George. And what I loved about him so much was that he confirmed what I instinctually knew about acting for me personally. Being honest, imagining, using your imagination. It's a super powerful tool. It makes your work more consistently good. Because nothing can touch that unless you let it. It's a very powerful acting tool, and it can compensate for a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you've got that going for you, you're in great shape. You just have to really discipline yourself and use it. And use it a lot. That is, he put it into words for me. I just instinctually knew that, but he taught me how to be more disciplined, in using it and making sure I used it. At a very, can I do a little, I did, I will not name the show, but it was a show that I was cast in after someone had been fired as a guest star. Super rare. Doesn't happen. If you're a guest star and you tank, they're going to use you because it costs too much money to can you and bring a whole other person and reshoot. They just don't do it. But for some reason that happened. I came in and did this show. And I couldn't understand why they would go to the trouble of canning this prior person and hiring me to get it right or whatever. I had no idea. So, but during that experience of shooting that, almost everything I had to do in one day, they just were, the crew was pissed. They were pissed off. Why are we having to shoot this again? So they crammed it all into a day or two of shooting. And then working with that director, I figured it out. He was terrifying. I had to be very emotional. My husband has died. I have to cry in every scene. And then there's all these scenes with my character crying and crying and crying. She lost her husband. She's got a child. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then we shot all this stuff all day. I cried all day on cue. No problems. We come to the last scene of the day, which is really the first scene in the show. So it's the opening scene you see when this door opens, you see this woman burst into tears. That's the very beginning, the first time you see my character in the show. But we've now shot all this other stuff where I'm crying and crying and crying and crying, and I'm nailing it. I'm no problems. The last scene of the day, which is really the first scene when they see me, I'm behind a closed door. And I hear from the other side, the camera's outside, looking at the closed door. And I hear action. Oh no, I hear rolling, which means the camera's rolling now. And all of a sudden, I'm getting into it. I get ready to cry because I got to open the door, see the person, and immediately burst into tears, right? So I'm getting all there. I'm ready to go. I'm all mentally prepared. I hear rolling. I'm totally solid. All of a sudden, the door opens up. The director sticks his head in and he goes, if you don't cry in this scene, everything else you've shot today doesn't matter. And of course, I am now rolling camera outside, closes the door, goes back out. And now I'm all thinking of all kinds of stupid things like acting and, I'm not going to be able to cry and all these stupid stuff. And because of my training and because I really strengthened my imagination tool, I was able to kind of he said action. Normally I'm like right away. I just took a minute and I scrubbed my brain of everything that man had just done. And I opened the door and was able to do it. But I had to overcome that idiot. And I'll say it, idiotic. So that is one of the best things you can do is imagine. Make it real. I mean, even we know some pathological liars in our lives. What do? They imagine until they believe it. And they become very convincing in their lies. Now, I don't call actors liars. I think actors are honest. Good actors, anyway. So long story, longer. Sorry. It's very important.
I think it is here. And I want to ask you a similar question, but kind of bringing us back to where we were at the start of the interview here when we learned about your parents and that your parents were also acting and from the acting world. And fast forward to today, and you have a daughter who, if you want to say her name as well, feel free to, but you have a daughter who's now in this same world as you. So, 3 generations doing this here. And I'd like to ask you, what's a gift that your parents gave you? And this could be either about acting or just about parenting, growing up, whatever. What is a gift that your parents gave you that you have now given to your daughter?
It's easy. The acting thing is it's a joyful experience. It's a way to create in a very unique way. And if you're a creative person, it's a great thing to be able to do. Unfortunately, with acting, you kind of have to get to a point. I mean, it's a little unlike this now because you can generate your own work a lot easier than you used to be able to do when I was working. But it's a wonderful life. You get to travel, you get to meet new people, and you get to experience this thing. My parents installed in me this kind of love for it, and it was sort of like a family business. You know, it's like when you see your parents doing something, you think, "Oh, I can do that too." It's a possible thing. Yeah. It's not a pipe dream. So that's something. My father had directed me a lot of stuff. My sister directs and acts. My brother was on Twin Peaks, played Bobby Briggs. And now my daughter, Peyton Ashbrook, my brother, Dana Ashbrook, my daughter, Peyton Ashbrook, just finished working on a thing called Ghost on Stars. So, yeah, we're all somewhere in there. We write, we direct, we produce, and we act. And there's some music involved as well. So, it's a wonderful life. It's a creative life. And certainly my parents gave that to me, watching them do what they did.
And last thing for today, Daphne, what's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Well, it's a great family, isn't it? I mean, I was bit by that bug before I ever did Melora, so I've been a part of that family. I love that wonderful, limitless storylines, you know, that's just wonderful. It's so much fun, and the people are great, and I'm so excited to meet everybody come June to see everybody over in Long Island. So, am I in Long Island? Is it?
You're going to be in Long Island, yes, because we're going to be seeing you, and fans can come meet you at Trek Long Island 2, which is going to be May 31st to June 2nd at the Hyatt Regency in Hauppauge, Long Island, New York. And if anybody wants to go get tickets to that, to purchase tickets, as well as photo ops for Daphne and all the other many stars that are going to be there, head over to treklongisland.com.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I'm good at that, right? I didn't even practice that. I just came out naturally.
You're really good at that. You are a professional.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I cannot wait to actually meet you there in person. Because like I said, doing this interview, having this quality time with you, it's amazing. And I also kind of just can't believe it. Because like I said, when I first started this 4 years ago, that list had you at the very top of there. It definitely, I'm pretty sure it's top 5. So to do this today and get this time with you, this is amazing. I feel like I've hit a milestone. I can cross this off the list now. And you're amazing. I really can't wait to actually get a photo with you in person and shake your hand and get a photo, get an 8x10.
Back at ya. You're fantastic. Thank you.
And also, before we go, I want to make sure everybody remembers to check out your memoirs because we did mention it today, and that's Dead Woman Laughing. We're going to have links to that in the show notes, so definitely pick it up. And yeah, again, can't wait to meet you. Thank you so much, Daphne, for your time today.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Thank you for checking it out. Don't forget to follow us on social media, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Trek Untold, and subscribe wherever you are listening to or watching on. And that includes the audio versions on whatever platforms that might be, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@TrekUntold. If you'd like to support this show financially, please consider visiting patreon.com/TrekUntold to become a member of this show. And along with getting access to all sorts of wonderful perks, you'll also know that you're helping out this show continue to thrive, survive, and make new content all the time. I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold. Thanks for watching. And until next time, always remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars, is powered by the RageWorks Podcast Network and affiliated with Nerd News Today. Attention all Starfleet personnel. New York's only fan-run Star Trek convention, Trek Long Island, is back this summer. Get ready for 3 days of sci-fi fun celebrating your favorite franchise in the Empire State. Meet the stars from Trek shows spanning different eras, including Melissa Navia and Yetidi Padaki from Strange New Worlds, Gabrielle Ruiz from Lower Decks, Armin Shimmerman, Chase Masterson, J.G. Hertzler, and Kitty Swink from DS9, Ethan Phillips from Voyager, Janet Kidder, Tara Rosling, Conrad Coates, and Elias Defexis from Discovery, and many more, including celebrities who haven't been at a Star Trek convention in years, like Clyde Kasatsu, Natalia Nogalich, and Daphne Ashbrook. Come meet your fellow fans. Take in a panel with your favorite podcasters. Enjoy Dinner with the Stars, featuring live musical performances. Meet authors, artists, and musicians, and so many more during this epic 3-day event brought to you by the talented and inclusive community that makes Star Trek go at warp speed. Trek Long Island takes place from May 31st to June 2nd at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Hauppauge, New York. Visit treklongisland.com for tickets, exclusive packages, and more information. Trek Long Island, going kindly this summer.